year, I brought up the decision that was made to deny a tree permit to be removed by Sarah and Joel Bond. And that decision resulted in the destruction of their house, and it almost killed their daughter. So I have a question. Have you guys set up a review of that decision and the process of making it?
Hello, Mr. Marshall. We have not set up a review of that situation that I'm aware of. Also, when an application is submitted for a regulated tree in the city to be removed, our process is to inspect the tree. And if the tree is dead, dying, or dangerous at the time of inspection, it is granted a removal permit. The city doesn't want hazardous trees any more than anyone else does. After that permit has been issued or denied, if the property owner does not agree with the outcome, they have the right to appeal that decision. It's my understanding there wasn't an appeal in this case. Also, that review, the application was several years prior to the incident. It is also completely expected for property owners who think a tree needs to be removed to submit for removal application at any time they wish. When we do an inspection, it is at the time that we're there. And if things change, which they often do after that, property owners, of course, can submit to have the tree re-inspected for removal.
And I've been through all that myself. I've actually made an appeal at one time and it was denied, which is, I expect, almost what always happens. And that's all fine. But this was a mistake. I mean, if anybody here thinks it wasn't a mistake to deny that permit, raise your hand and tell me why. And if you think you've made a worse mistake than this, it got someone's house destroyed and almost killed their kid, raise your hand and tell me about it. So I suggest that you do a failure analysis of some kind. Go back and create a subcommittee or whatever it is and say, what did we do here? What did we get wrong? Does anybody know why you might want to do that?
So let me ask, in their case, the city forester was saying it was 7 years ago with the original.
Some years.
Five, anyway, it was a while ago. Based on the knowledge available, the tree inspector at that time, they made their decision. And do you know, were the current property owners, were they in the property then? Were they the ones who made that request?
The article suggests that that's the case. So last year, I requested a permit to remove a tree that's right next to my house. It's a double trunk cedar. It's been there for 20 years. And I've tried to take care of it, cabled the two trunks together. And the guy who was mowing my yard noticed that in high winds, the root ball was moving. So I requested a permit for the tree to be removed, and it was denied. The arborist came out, of course, not during a high wind, not that an arborist could tell you anything about the strength of a root ball. And so that tree's 20 feet away from my daughter's bedroom. What do you think I'm going to do if that thing falls on my house and kills my daughter?
So if the arborist can see movement in the ground where it's obvious that there are cracks around the tree and there's the orientation of the tree is, shall we say, not what it used to be. If an arborist can see that, those are alert signals. If there's no evidence of that.
What if he's wrong?
Well,
How are you going to take responsibility for the consequences of that mistake?
what if he's right?
Nothing happens if he's right. Good for him. But if he's wrong, it crushes my kid.
And did that happen in these 70-mile-an-hour winds? It didn't.
You want to wait till next time?
I'm saying it survived a lot of storms so far.
So we are at the end of the public comment period, and we have other agenda items to.
You
move
think
on to.
something you've got on your agenda is more important than this? What is it? All right, I'm gonna get out of your hair. Last time I was here, someone said that you've got a risk analysis that you do on trees. Is that a procedure you have?
Risk analysis is something that professional arborists and tree inspectors are trained to do.
Do you have a procedure for it?
You can Google tree risk assessment qualification from the International Society of Arboriculture and get information on that. We follow the same procedure.
Do you have that procedure in-house?
I would have to look into that. It's part of the required training. Several of our staff, according to their role, are required to have certain certifications, including ISA arborist certifications. So it's part of what is considered when they are hired into their positions. And it's refresher training that's required for their certification.
So can I get somebody to send me the link to the risk procedure that you do?
Sure, we can send you the ISA.
Give you my email.
I'm sure we have it. Thank you.
I do.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
All right, we'll see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We actually do have a quorum now. So we can move on to the meeting minutes.
Okay. Any questions or discussion about last month's meeting minutes?
Yeah, I think I sent February and March, so the last 2 months. Yeah. Any changes? Sounds like not.
No changes on my end.
Motion to approve March and February meeting minutes.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from the last 2 months' meetings.
Second.
Well, I'm happy to second.
Great. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes? Again. Any opposed?
One.
Thank you, of course. Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. First, let's see, today I have 5 items for you. The first, because we can never say it enough, is to thank you sincerely for your service as forestry commissioners, your service to the city, to the people of Portland and Portland's forest. The work you do is super important in terms of being the one body that specifically advises the city on tree policies. And today, leading into my second item, our agenda includes an important topic that is an ample amount of agenda time to discuss the urban forest plan update, formerly called the Portland Urban Forest Management Plan. And as you know, you've been involved in this update previously in meetings and outside of the regular meetings, but we are updating a plan that is now some 20 years old, so much in need of update. And today you'll get a lot of information on the status of that project and also opportunity to discuss and give feedback on it. And as you also hopefully know by now, this will be a recurrent topic at commission meetings in the future as well. Another item is you might have tracked that the transition to the new form of government is proceeding. It's had a number of steps along the way that we've tried to help you be aware of. The latest step is the establishment of deputy city administrator positions in the city. And so we now have a new deputy city administrator who is over the vibrant communities area. That area, you may recall, consists of parks, also the children's levy, and the city arts programs. Those are the vibrant communities area. The deputy city administrator is Sonia Szymanski. Sonia comes to us into that role from being in the mayor's office at City Hall. And prior to that, Sonia was chief of staff for then Commissioner Fish, who was at that time the Parks Commissioner. And she has other background that may be of interest to you. And it's best for her to tell you about that. So Sonia is planning to come to next month's meeting to meet you. And also it's planned that her chief of staff, Kelly Torres, will attend as well. And Kelly comes into her new role as Sonia's chief of staff from being the chief of staff for Commissioner Ryan. So more on that next month. My next item for you is an update on the Portland Clean Energy Fund. As you know, the Portland Clean Energy Fund Equitable Tree Canopy Initiative was approved some time ago by City Council, and we have been working on that implementation. So updates on Equitable Tree Canopy include the work group that you all know a lot about, and Forestry Commission will have a representative on, is still being put together. So we're awaiting seeing who will be on that and for it to kick off. And that's something that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, which is the home of PSEF, Portland Clean Energy Fund, is leading. And that work group is the guidance, community guidance body for the Equitable Tree Canopy Initiative. And also likely would be the community guidance body for the new, not yet approved, proposed tree protection and care initiative funded by PSEF. You may recall that the tree protection and care initiative includes the city assuming responsibility for street tree maintenance. Funds are in that package for that work. Meanwhile, while we are awaiting those steps, Urban Forestry and Parks are in the process of contracting with 4 community organizations to work with Urban Forestry to provide community outreach and education on the yard tree giveaway program funded through the Equitable Tree Canopy Initiative. So the contracts with the community organizations will be funded by the PSEF initiative. This is a really early step in implementing the Equitable Tree Canopy goals. Everyone's eager to see Equitable Tree Canopy get going. And this is one of the ways that we thought of, Angie DeSalvo, the manager over that team, thought of to implement. So we're really excited about it happening. And hopefully we'll be able to announce the 4 organizations that will be partnering and contracting with very soon. Reminder that the Equitable Tree Canopy Program, the goal is to work in Portland's most heat vulnerable neighborhoods to equitably plant and establish at least 15,000 trees on public and private property. And that this is one of the fast-tracked programs of the PSEF Climate Investment Plan. As far as the tree planting and care initiative, there's really nothing new on that. As you know, the proposal for that, again, including street tree maintenance, was approved by the PSEF Advisory Committee. A next step will be for that suggestion to be captured in the mayor's budget, so supported by the mayor and therefore represented in his proposed budget. And if that occurs, then City Council would deliberate that allocating that funding as they do all other funding allocations at this time of year. And if they approve, it would be available July 1st for implementation to begin. And another reminder, building a whole street tree maintenance program from the ground up will not be an overnight adventure. It will take some time. Last but not least, it's the time of year in the city's fiscal cycle when bureaus begin the process of bringing any proposed regulatory fee updates to City Council for their consideration and possible approval. As a matter of fact, there's presentations today at the Development Review Advisory Committee on that topic. So when I say regulatory fee updates, these are permit fees. This is the city's approach of trying to recover the costs of administering regulations in the city. So at present, urban forestry's fees are not proposed to have any changes. So no increases in forestry's fees. That concludes my report. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Commissioner Nelson.
Is the deputy, so this is Bruce Nelson, for those of you online who don't see names of people who are in the room, who don't have a computer. The deputy city administrator, is that an appointed position?
These have been appointed, yes.
And who are they appointed by?
I'm not entirely sure, but I believe it's the commissioner in charge of that service area. So it would have been Commissioner Ryan. Does that sound right?
Dan Ryan?
I think that's right. In the new form of government, it will be the mayor or city manager, I believe, who appoints those, because they're part of the administrative structure of the city, not the political council. But I think in this interim period, they're sort of making appointments to get that structure in place.
That's my understanding too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. New adventure, right? And by the way, that means the deputy city administrator, they are reporting to, in this case, the commissioner in charge of vibrant communities, Commissioner Ryan, and they supervise the parks director, who is my supervisor. So a little bit of change in our organization structure as we head towards new government.
I had a question. So you said there'll be 4 community-based organizations, but we don't know who yet. You're still determining who that would be?
That has been determined, but we're completing the process and
finalizing.
I don't want to scoop anything.
Yeah. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
You'll let us know next time.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we'll announce it soon. Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, we're ahead of schedule then, because we don't need to spend time on Title 11 fees update because that covered it.
It's a bit of a shift. We will not be raising fees.
So that became very easy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we can move to natural resource service delivery project update. If everybody's here for that.
Yeah, looks like it. Good.
All right. Hey, I'll kick us off. I'm Chris Wallace Caldwell. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Catalysis LLC, which makes us sound like a big firm. We're not a big firm, but we are facilitating this process between the multiple bureaus involved. And to start us off, I'll pass it over to Directors Long and Director Uchiyama to give us a quick intro. I will then give a summary of where we are in the process to date, the work that's been done, and Laura Lehman from Parks will give us some next steps.
I don't know what to say other than thank you for having us here, and thank you also to the Commission for identifying representatives to work alongside our subject matter experts to put the final touches on our work plan, which is going to be submitted to the Chief Administrative Officer at the end of this month. And so this is a great opportunity for us to provide you an update on where we're at. And I'm joined with me, Director Uchiyama, although there's really some weird things going on with the names in the boxes. So there are several Laura Lehmans. And folks might want to rename themselves. So Dawn Uchiyama is here, Director of Bureau of Environmental Services. Laura Lehman, who's project managing this from the parks end. And I saw her a moment ago. No, I did not. Okay. Oh, there she is. Shayna, sorry. Everyone's bopping around. Shayna Anderson, who's the project manager from BES. But I just, as a reminder, there are 5 bureaus who are involved in this work. So I guess, Chris, I'll pass it back.
Oh,
Director Uchiyama, go ahead. And
yeah, I just want to say thank you, Adina, for catching that. I didn't even realize my name, the name label had changed, having some technical difficulties, I guess. But I just want to say good morning, everyone, and thank you for making time on your agenda for this topic. I know you have many things that you're wrestling with and advancing, and I just really, again, want to reiterate Adina's point of thanking you for contributing members of your commission to participate in the review of the Natural Resources Work Plan. And I know that the plan is better and stronger and will result in better outcomes as a result of your input and participation. So just a heartfelt thank you to all of you, and just really glad to be here with you today, and I look forward to the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you to both the directors. I'm going to show just a few slides to give an overview of the process that we've been involved in and the outcomes of it, and then we'll hear about like what the upcoming immediate next steps are. But we will have time for questions and thoughts as well from all of you. So we really look forward to that. Let me share my screen and we'll go through those slides. All right. So we held 2 different workshops, one on March 22nd and April 12th. And these included subject matter experts from the 5 bureaus, so Parks, BES, PBOT, Water, and Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And then also representatives from the 3 advisory bodies that advise those groups. So of course, Urban Forestry Commission, also PUB, and the Parks Board. And what we did is we brought those folks together to really spend some time on thinking very clearly how to put together a meaningful work plan to address the City Resolution 37609 that was passed last spring. Basically, as you all know, this was a broad resolution focused on the transformation, alignment of services, and shared priorities for Portland in natural resource service delivery. And this work plan is essentially, we have our kind of plain language version of how we describe this. This is essentially how we will figure out what must change in natural resource delivery in the city, who will be involved, and when we will do it. And the important thing was to think about the work that had been done to date and how to make the best use of that and identify the most important inputs, the most important things about the process, and the most important outcomes. So just to underscore this, the work plan itself is not a document that's designed to lay out the changes, but is to say how can we have a very collaborative, participatory process in the city to identify the changes that we think would be the most impactful for natural resources in the city of Portland. There we go. So we asked at the first session, we asked for participants to weigh in on the work plan. And what we wanted to do, the way we designed this is that we didn't want to have a line by line where we tend to get buried in the details of a work plan and looking at specific like wording. We wanted to make sure we emphasize that we have the most important inputs to the work. So the work plan should identify what information or resources do we need to do the work. We wanted to make sure that we focused on the process, which is really the how, and that includes who should be part of the process, how decisions will be made, what are the checkpoints we need throughout the way, how are we engaging community, how are we engaging staff. And then finally, the outcomes, we wanted folks to weigh on what should result from this work, like what should be in place by the time we go through this work plan. We had a good amount of brainstorming that came from both workshops. Some of the things that were really helpful was to identify what currently exists in the work plan. And what folks saw is that in parts in the work plan, there was things that had been added since we've been engaged in discussions with you all since the beginning of the year. So there's things that Laura and Shayna, as the project managers, were bringing into the work plan that were there. People also expressed a lot of appreciation for seeing what the other folks in the room, and that's one of the benefits of having a group process like this, is that people have the ability to not just weigh as an individual, but see what are the other ideas that are coming forward. So the input from this first session was then brought into another version of the work plan draft. And just to give you some highlights on what were some of the kind of the very high level ideas that came forward, there were ideas around clarifying the problem to solve, a lot of discussion on defining terms and scope of this work. And this is very clearly laid out in the work plan as a need for, I love this, not only a glossary that would be clear how we're all using terms across the city, how we use them differently, but also how to define terms that are that can be public facing definitions, so that this is a component of the work plan, not just to stay in a very insular city language, but to think about how this is shared with the community. Engaging in meaningful engagement, clarifying expectations and roles for stakeholders, decision-making process, ensuring timely, clear, transparent communications, and really starting to think about change management and how we communicate about any changes to natural resource delivery, both with staff and with the community. And some of the essential outcomes that folks identified and have been bringing forward is really looking at what is our common vision and goals for this work. Some of you all might remember the blue sky scenarios that were identified early on in the process as potential outcomes. A lot of great discussion on that was a starting point, but it needs additional input because there are other metrics in the city, other outcomes, things like addressing biodiversity, for example, that could be really brought into those blue sky outcomes, and that we don't want to just use that first pass from the 5 bureaus, but to actually dig a little deeper in identifying those. So where we are as far as next steps, we integrated the input from the workshop number 1 into the work plan draft that went out to all the workshop participants, as well as they received all the raw notes, and we created a tracker. So just to be able to see the input that people provided and what was done with that input. Where did it show up in the work plan? So the folks in the work that were part of this group were able to track that. And then we had the second workshop where we gathered additional feedback. And this gave us a chance to dig deeper into the 7 specific elements of the work plan. So moving from that high level, the workshop participants were able to provide input that were specific to each stage of the work plan, or each of the 7 components of the work plan, and we're able to also provide those after the workshop. So that's what we're in the process of integrating right now, is that input, and Shayna and Laura may be able to speak to that in a little bit, because right now we are working on the revised work plan draft, and it's scheduled to be distributed today. Laura can give us an update if that has changed. We are going to provide that to you as well as to Pub and to the Parks Board, and we'll be looking for comments due April 24th. We recognize this is a fast turnaround. Integrate that final input, process of all the different bureau directors reviewing and briefing the commissioners. And then the final deadline on this that we have been facing is the delivery of the work plan to the CAO at the end of this month. So I may have taken all your talking points, Laura, with those next steps, but why don't we turn it over to you and you can describe any updates to that and where we are in the process.
Thanks, Chris. No, I think you covered it. You can, yeah, like Chris said, you can expect to see, if you haven't seen it already, you can expect to see the revised draft work plan probably today. It's been distributed to the coordinators for each of the advisory boards. So that's all I have on that.
Great. And yeah, you said by the end of today is the anticipated time for that work plan?
Right. It was shared with the coordinators, so for each of the boards. So it was sent to Brian yesterday.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what Brian's calendar looks like today, but we can certainly, Brian, if you need assistance getting that out, we'd be happy to help. But I think folks can expect to see it very soon.
Yeah, it was sent out this morning, so everyone should have it.
Thank you, Brian. So that could have been marked completed, but of course the work is still to be done on it. And we are happy to take the time we have here to answer any questions, hear any thoughts that you all have on the process. So we'll open that up. And I'm happy to return to the slides if anyone needs those. And I think those can be distributed. They're high level, but if you don't have them already, then you will. I just wanted to thank specifically JR and Ivory and Ali who are present here for their participation in those workshops. And I realized I had a moment in our internal agenda to actually invite you to provide any of your input before we go to questions, so my apologies. So Megan, if we could take a moment to do that. So if you have any reflections or that you want to add to the process, we'd love to hear from any of you.
I think you did a good summary of that. It was a very good intellectual exercise. It wasn't just like us listening. We were like posting stuff on the wall and writing things into the process. So it was very interactive and there was like plenty of opportunity to still connect. I like there was like it's good to have community and staff there at the same time to give feedback on like, what about this? And this is what we have questions about. And they were able to kind of answer it on the spot. And that sort of led to like why we made the recommendations that we did was because we had that conversation together. So thanks for letting us participate.
Thank you, JR. I think Ali wrote in the chat, thank you, and I'm eager to see how the feedback has been built into the plan, right? Because that's what the important thing to see. Ivory, did you have anything to add?
Oh, just to echo what JR and Ali said, just thank you for facilitating this space and allowing us to really think about things like in the second workshop, we were able to take time in the moment to think specifically about the different components of the work plan and then talk about it. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, Megan, can we come to your question? I think you posted in the chat, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, my question was actually, I wanted to hear from the advisory body folks. And I might ask, JR, Ali, or Ivory, just if you have any, like, in sharing any feedback, like when asked to like give comment, right? Like if we want to give comment on this plan, is there feedback any of you already had that you thought was really important throughout the process that might be important to highlight to the rest of us so we know like feedback that came up during those conversations that you're hoping to see in the revisions?
I can just say from my perspective, there were two things that I was hoping for. I guess the two main things I was hoping for. One was, restoration, habitat, there's certain things that are talked about, but there's no larger framework given. So I was really hoping for the biodiversity crisis to be called out within the plan, just the way that climate change is called out. And then there's things that filter in below it to provide a framework for some of the goals that we're actually working towards. And a piece that I thought was really lacking in the plan was the opportunity to rethink what communications looks like from the Bureau and the public, and thinking of it as an opportunity to really rebrand, reinvent, and reintroduce whatever the entity looks like to the community, and rethink, basically modernize communications to meet people where they are in terms of how they process information, how government interacts with them, and not less government speak, and more of an opportunity to really connect with the public through a new form. I think anytime you do something different, it's an opportunity to reintroduce yourself, and it's a big opportunity to re-examine how you've done comms.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from the group?
Bruce?
A year or so ago, there was saying that water was not going to be part of this area. Is that still the case? I was confused as to where water comes in here, and I don't, so I'll just leave it open at that.
I wonder if one of the directors could speak to that. They have been involved in the process.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he meant the Bureau or water as a natural resource, but yes to both.
So it is being considered?
Yes.
Okay, and how about what is it? The quality of the water in the Willamette River and the pollutants that are going in there or might be going in there?
Yeah, I think that's a level of detail that I'm sure we will be discussing at some point, but the work plan itself is, I would say, more of like a 10,000-foot view of, I think somebody referred to it as a process for a process. And so, but certainly water quality is important to all of us. And I imagine will be one of those sort of outcomes and goals that we'd like to see when we think about what natural resource service delivery looks like for the city.
And I believe in the blue sky scenarios, there's some water quality metrics, and it is referred to specifically as in the list of items in the city resolution 37609.
Well
I
done.
got that wrong. Did I get it? I didn't even look at my notes. All right. Does that answer your question? I think it's not the perfect answer because it's saying it's to be determined, but it is included in the process. And subject matter experts from the Water Bureau were involved in the workshop. Other questions or comments? Go ahead.
This is Bruce again. In this particular document, I assume it's not appropriate for it to clarify how this is one of, I forget the number, 4 or 5 service areas, and many of the bureaus that that were part of this process will no longer be in that service area. And so I don't know if that's something that is that dealt with at a higher level. Like my understanding is BES is no longer going to be part of this service area, or never was. So I just want to, is that something in this work plan will be clarified how the entities within this group will have to deal with bureaus that are in other service areas when there is overlap? Or is the idea that there will no longer be overlap?
I guess I can just chime in really quick. This is Donnie Chiama, Director of BES. I mean, there will always, I think, be some overlap. Right now, there are 3 service areas across the 5 bureaus that are involved. So this will require continued coordination across the service areas. That won't stop us from looking at how the services are provided.
I saw some other questions. Commissioner Hanacho?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment that this process, the workshop itself, was very meta, which I think many of the participants would agree was a very interesting way to kind of engage with this. Coming together to think about the process of how a process will be done is challenging in nature. So I really appreciated the facilitators just helping to kind of guide the process. And I also am grateful that they captured the need to clarify. And I think you put it in one of your slides, but to clarify the problem that we're working to solve and to really clarify the expectations and the roles of the stakeholders for the piece that they're engaging with, because it's such a large effort that we can easily get lost in the weeds.
And I don't know if there were, I can't see the room, so for the chair, if there were questions there. But Casey, I did see you raised your hand at one point, so wanted to invite you.
Yeah, thanks. I don't I rescinded it because I couldn't really come up with a good question. Ultimately, the work that you're doing, I'm very happy about. I was an inspector with the city for a while, so I know how complicated it is to work with different bureaus, and so I'm happy that this is happening, and I guess I'm hoping that it all comes together. I think what was just mentioned, this being such a meta kind of thing, is um it's really interesting, and I'm very curious what it's going to be like once it gets on the ground. Everyone has their own idea of how their regulations, and I'm saying this in that this is how it used to be, which is probably, hopefully, the problem you're going to solve is that each individual bureau kind of considers their section of the code their code, and it should be the priority. So I'm mostly just curious what it's all going to end up looking like, I think, at the end of the day, and how on the ground, when reviewers are looking at plans, how we decide what the priority is, moving a pipe or removing a tree or planting a tree versus putting in something else. So yeah, I guess I just couldn't come up with a very good question, more of just I'm very curious if it's actually going to work out, or if it's just going to be a whole lot of big level discussions that don't actually reflect any significant change on the ground. And I should note, I'm looking at it from a tree perspective. I do think that urban green infrastructure should just be called infrastructure and no longer be referred to as green, because that, in my opinion, changes it from normal to a different thing. And I'd like it all to be kind of considered on the same level. But anyway, so I'm mostly just curious to see if that's is actually going to end up with any change, and I'm very hopeful. But yeah, I think that's all I really have to add.
Thank you, Casey. Definitely that conversation about elevating natural resources as part of the city infrastructure in a different way is something that's come up. Megan.
Yes, thank you, Chris. That's actually a great comment. Right, what you were saying, it relates to mine. And Ivory, thank you for that summary. It's actually really helpful. Is I think, some of the points came up, at least that I've heard from the public, right, is the concern around that elevation, right? And that's why I know that there were conversations around one bureau versus a distributed model. And there's pluses and minuses to both, obviously. And I know at the end of the day, as a group, I think we all just care that natural resources continue to be funded and elevated and prioritized within all of those things, including Ali's comments about like biodiversity, right? And so I know that that's what we're holding near and dear, and just wanting to make certain it plays at the same level within our city. I think this is a group of folks in this room that all care about that. So it's not that there's not that shared commitment. I think we're just trying to push it so it's the city's shared commitment. And so I think that's the comment. How do we do that and ensure that happens?
Thank you. I know we've gone over time, but Dawn, you're just coming off.
Well,
and
I
then
just want to
turn it
say
back
thank
the
you so
chair.
much for that comment, Megan. And my ask is to stay involved. I know that it's very awkward to be planning for the plan, and I really appreciate how frustrating that can be. But I really, my hats are off to Catalysis and to all the participants in these discussions, because even though that was challenging, we created a space where we're building relationship, we're building trust, we're building understanding, we're gaining a shared vocabulary. And so it's painful because we want to get things done and we want to see change. But this is part of us not having any assumptions and not going off and doing things the way we typically do them because we think this is the right way, but instead really opening it up and saying, okay, this is what we're thinking. What do you all think? And then learning along the way, so that when we do get to the actions and we do get to the change, that people own that and feel a part of it. So I just have loved this discussion today, and the ask is to continue to just stay involved and share your best ideas.
All right, we'll turn it back to the chair unless there are any other comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here and presenting to us. And I think we'll all be very interested to keep following this. But we really appreciate you being here. All right, we are almost exactly on time, which is great. So we're going to turn it over to the Portland Urban Forest Plan update next. That'll be our last agenda item.
Do you want me to kick it off or? Sure. All right. Yeah. Yeah, everyone, we are, so we have an update on some of the work done so far on the Portland Urban Forest Plan. We have some information to share in some of the engagement work we've done, particularly some of the engagement with other city bureaus who are involved in urban forest management. Also information on some of the canopy change analysis that we've been doing. And then we also have time for some initial discussions around the vision and goals. That's a really central part of the urban forest plan, is setting a new vision and goals for the urban forest. And the UFC has a really important role in advising on that process. So yeah, we're very excited. It's the first really sort of in-depth, substantive time we've had with the commission to talk about the plan. So with that, Linda has a PowerPoint and we'll get right into it.
Right, well, thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to give you all an update on what we've been doing. Definitely been very busy working on the urban forest plan. So first, just want to give you a general timeline of kind of where we are at in the project as a whole, and then give you an update about community engagement we've been working on, we're calling a current conditions assessment, and then leave time for discussion, as Brian mentioned. So in terms of where we are, just as a reminder, we're splitting this project up into 3 phases. This first phase is listening and learning and assessing where we're at. And then the second phase, which we're kind of teeing up very much right now, is more focused on the future, thinking about our vision and goals and recommendations. That will take us through to into fall. And then the final phase is just kind of wrapping things up, documenting what we heard, how we're using that feedback, and writing the plan and sharing it for public review and finally adoption, which will take us into spring of 2025.
So in terms of community engagement, we have been working with our advisory committees, Community Advisory Committee or CAC, our Technical Advisory Committee or TAC, and then also sharing information with the public. So just to give you a brief summary of what we've been doing to engage each of these different groups. In terms of the Community Advisory Committee, we have had 2 different meetings so far. Of which Commissioner McMillan, who I'm not sure if she's on the call today, but she's been present at both of those. So at those meetings, we've been sharing information about the project, the role of the committee, just so we're all clear on what we're doing and why. Discussing topics, just to sort of get on the same page. So thinking about what are the services that trees provide? Why are we creating this plan in the first place? Why is it important? Also shared our community engagement strategy and got feedback on that. Spent a lot of time talking about how to communicate with different groups within the public so we can make sure throughout this entire process and once we have the plan that we're communicating to everyone and people are aware of opportunities to provide input. We've also been talking about tree canopy coverage and tree equity, but more specifically looking at understanding challenges to preserving, planting, and caring for trees, the types of locations where committee members want to have trees, and also just started discussions about things we want to consider as we create the vision and goals. Then for our technical advisory committee, which includes staff from I think 8 different bureaus, and then also Metro, Multnomah County, and the state, and TriMet. So for those meetings, we've had 2 of those so far, as well as staff interviews. And we've discussed the project and scope, our engagement strategy, our management strengths and challenges and opportunities, and also started to think about our approach for how we're going to be setting canopy targets, but really just sort of our review process for what we're looking for in terms of our review of what other cities have been doing to inform that discussion. And then in terms of the general public engagement, up until recently, it's mostly been us sharing information out. So putting information, creating a website, sharing information in multiple different city newsletters, email list updates. But now in the spring, we have our survey and open house, which are kind of the first really big opportunities for the public to provide input. And then for underserved communities, so this is thinking about our engagement with BIPOC communities, immigrants and refugees, people with disabilities, older adults, youth, non-native English speakers. So we have representation from several of those groups on our community advisory committee, but we're also engaging with them through focus groups. So far we have had 7 different focus groups with communities and doing some of the similar things that we're doing with the advisory committee. So talking about the project, ways to provide input, and then focusing discussions on challenges to preserving, planting, and caring for trees, where people want to have trees, to inform our canopy targets discussions, and then just making a lot of space to hear from people about their ideas for our vision, goals, and recommendations. So from those, we've had focus groups for people with disabilities, the Black community, Indigenous community, immigrants and refugees, and 4 of our 7 have been completed in languages other than English, so in Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and Vietnamese. And for all of our engagement with underserved communities, we've been providing stipends, meals for in-person activities, and really just trying to be as flexible as we can to make it as easy as possible for these communities to engage with us. And last, our stakeholder discussions. This is kind of sort of a catch-all phrase for what we've been doing to try to think about who we're not reaching from all of the other activities, but we know either have a stake in urban forest management, have a role to play, or are heavily impacted by decisions we make as urban forest managers. So we've been giving presentations to other city advisory committees like the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Fright Committee, And then also, we weren't reaching a lot of youth with our other activities, so we went and spoke to the Multnomah Youth Commission, who are really interested, and we'll probably keep engaging with them. Over the summer, we have a series of discussions planned for older adults. So this is something we'll just kind of keep adding to as we see who we are and aren't hearing from. This is mostly just serving as a visual for what we're doing to engage with communities who aren't on our advisory committees. So we have our focus groups. We'll do another round of those in the fall. We have our open house coming up next week, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. And then we'll be doing another one of those. And then the survey. And then later in the process, when we have our draft plan, we'll be sharing that for public review. And then throughout, kind of starting in the spring and carrying us up to the end of the project is just having ongoing discussions, presentations, tabling, trying to reach as many people as we can. So we're really trying to provide different ways of providing input, online, in person, large group, small group, just providing a lot of opportunities for people, and really trying to hear from both people who do engage with this work. So organizations already working in environmental advocacy or with trees, but also people who don't usually engage with those kinds of activities. Oh, and this is really just a plug for you all to encourage you to keep helping us promote the open house and survey if you haven't already. So we have our open house coming up next week on Wednesday. It's informal, so you can drop by and stay for as much as you want. We have our survey, which has been live for about a month now and will be open for about 2 more weeks. More details on the website. If you would like flyers or social media posts or anything like that to help promote this, let me know and I'm happy to provide those. So next, we've been working with our consultant team to put together a State of the Urban Forest report, which is a summary of all of the non-community engagement pieces of how we're assessing our current conditions. So this includes canopy analysis, permit data analysis, and the staff interviews. So that report, we're still finalizing it. So that will eventually be available and we'll have a lot more detail than what I'm going to go into right now. This is just to give you a sense of some of the things, the kinds of things we're looking at. So I'll start with our canopy analysis. And we are, as part of this process, using our inventory data, so our street and park tree inventories. But for today, I'm just going to focus on what we've been doing, analyzing LiDAR data, so kind of that higher level canopy coverage. So this is one example of something we're doing that Urban Forestry hasn't done in the past, at least to my knowledge. So we looked at the canopy coverage data, and in addition to looking at a neighborhood level, we've also broken it up into these 25-acre hexagons. And so in the map, you're seeing the darker green areas are areas with more tree canopy. There's not, I think, for anyone of us who's been looking at these types of maps for a while, there's no major surprises, but it does just provide another way to look at canopy cover with a much more nuanced and detailed look than we typically have at the neighborhood scale. And then, so I should also mention we're looking at canopy data from 2019, but also 2014, so we can look at trends over time. And so for each of these things I'm going through, that's how we've done it. We've looked at 2019 data, also 2014 data. So for this example, we're looking at canopy cover by council district. This is, I think, an interesting and helpful way to look at it because council districts are created with a very intentional purpose, and we know that they have equal populations within them, unlike neighborhoods. So it's just another way to really see this, basically the stark difference in canopy coverage from the west side and the rest of the city.
In that chart, you're just using averages. So even though within a council district, there may be variations in canopy, you're just calling it all the same. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is a total cover. It's not actually the average, but the total for the area. So yeah, as we know, for council districts 1, 2, and 3, they look fairly similar in here, but thanks to the other map, we know that there's a lot of variation within there. So we're also looking by neighborhood. So on the map on the left, canopy cover from 2019 by neighborhood, darker green areas, more tree canopy cover. And then the map on the right says canopy change. I know those legends are hard to read, but basically the blue areas represent areas of canopy growth and the red areas represent areas of canopy loss. And we're still digging into kind of the details of what's going on here. But generally we can see there's actually we're seeing more loss in areas where we have more canopy. There's definitely some exceptions to that, but as a whole, it's kind of the first trend that stands out. And then 2 new analyses that we're doing as part of this project are looking at canopy cover in different types of elements of our transportation network. So first we looked at neighborhood walkways, which were kind of first defined in our city's pedestrian plan, PED-PDX, and then later updated in our transportation system plan. But neighborhood walkways are areas where the city is trying to encourage people to walk and bike. So they're generally local residential streets, but they do also include trails, and also safe routes to school, where those fall on local streets, and neighborhood greenways. So streets that we're designing for biking on local streets. So in this map, we are looking at the average canopy cover for neighborhood walkways within a neighborhood. And again, the darker green colors are areas with more canopy. So citywide, so looking at all of the neighborhood walkways across the city, 30% of that area is covered by canopy, compared to, for all streets, 24%. So much higher, which is good to see. And then as an average for neighborhoods, it's just a little bit lower. It's 30% instead of that 35%. But just a note that right now that data does include trails. So like Wildwood Trail and Forest Park is included. So it's, yeah, not quite an accurate picture. But even within that, we can still see, as I think none of us are surprised by, many of the neighborhood walkways that are around like 50th or 60th and East, really much less canopy covered than the rest of the city. Another one that we've been looking at in terms of transportation is the city's major transit priority streets. So these are streets that the city either already has designed and intends for frequent transit service or is planning for that. Again, looking at canopy cover along those streets specifically, as we all know, much, much lower than what it is for neighborhood walkways. So citywide, 13% of our major transit priority streets are covered by canopy, compared to 24% for all streets. I know the lines on this map are difficult to read, so we're working with our consultants to kind of brighten those colors. So we will make that change. Something that's come up a lot in our focus groups and community advisory committee is when we talk about places where we want trees, certainly people waiting for the bus and transit has come up a lot. So it's nice to be able to provide this map to really look at that. Something else we've been looking at canopy cover and canopy change is by land use. Open space, that surprisingly has the highest. Great. And then we also kind of see a little bit fairly high on institutional, but that includes college campuses. I think that's why that one is so high. And then,
sorry, would that also include schools?
I don't think it would. We have schools separately
yeah.
that we're looking at. I don't believe they're covered in institutional. I think that's more like the OHSUs and
Yes,
Portland State.
Yeah.
University of Portland, yeah.
Yeah, sort of campus and like residential institutions. Industrial areas and commercial areas are really the two lowest. So there's a lot of opportunity and growth there. And among residential areas, we're pretty close to the citywide goal of 33%. But again, we know that that looks very different depending on where you are in the city. The last one I'll share, this analysis is looking at schools. So we looked at canopy coverage by different school individual properties, but also school type. So preschools, elementary schools, middle, junior high, high school, college, and university. Here, college and universities are high. I think that kind of matches what a lot of us probably think of when we think about our lived experience on those areas. They're much larger campuses and really play a different role than, in many cases, than the other schools. High schools is the lowest. I think that's also a little bit unsurprising given that we know that those campuses need to make space for athletic fields. So a lot of the area typically goes to that. Elementary school is quite low. So definitely an opportunity there to do more. We have our Learning Landscapes program, which works with schools, and that program has been growing. So hopefully there's more opportunity to continue to grow that and find other ways to partner with schools. During many of our focus groups, that's something that's come up is people wanting to see more, people really caring about their children having access to nature, especially for those living in apartments who don't have it right outside their door. So many of them have mentioned wanting more trees at schools and parks and playgrounds, so that there's just more access there.
And I have a question about preschools. Is that counting like in-home as well as a center, like a preschool?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about in-home.
That's a great, I'm not sure.
I guess part of why I'm asking is because that percentage is so much higher. I'm just like, what if we could uncover why that is?
Capturing some residential,
because it might be residential, exactly. Yeah.
And I just looked up a few schools on our zoning map. A lot of the public schools are zoned residential, interestingly enough. I think because they're generally in neighborhoods and they're not following their sort of typical comprehensive plan of commercial or industrial or institutional areas. They're just in neighborhoods. I think they're often just given some sort of variance to be there. Yeah, that's interesting.
If this is based on zoning, then I would think the preschools in homes are not.
Not,
yeah.
I mean,
someone can check on.
Yeah, we can look at that. Right, so now I'm going to switch gears and talk about what we're calling sort of our management needs and challenges. This is mostly or completely at this point informed by conversations we've had with our technical advisory committee and staff interviews. So this is just another element of how we're assessing where we are right now with how we manage the urban forest, what we should be focusing on for the future. So we interviewed staff in all of our different bureaus represented on our technical advisory committee. We spoke with them about what is their role in managing the urban forest now, what's working well, what's not working well, how are all of those work groups thinking about climate change, thinking about equity, and what are opportunities that we can focus on for the future to do a better job of being managers and caretakers of our urban forest. So for those interviews, these are the 8 different bureaus we spoke to, many more kind of sub work groups within these. We did 11 different interviews in total with over 80 city staff. So we had quite a lot of feedback, very useful discussions. I think in some cases it was first time we were having some of the same people in the same room. That was very useful for everyone to hear everyone's perspective. We got hundreds and hundreds of comments, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but just wanted to share sort of our process for synthesizing those and some key takeaways. So after the interviews, we grouped all of the comments by management category. So thinking about tree preservation and protection, communication, education and outreach, equity, climate change, policy, and planning, coordination, and collaboration. Put all those comments in a matrix. So that will be available in our State of the Urban Forest report. I want to dive into the details. But in terms of key takeaways, so for planning, coordination, and collaboration, and this is really speaking to all of those things between bureaus or work groups, there's definitely a need for improved data and work tracking systems to help collaboration across different land uses and different work groups. Also an expressed need for engaging urban forestry early on in different processes to help with improve our outcomes for urban forestry for development, for capital improvement projects. And also establishing consistent practices for planting and establishment across bureaus. There's a lot of variation and a lot of opportunity to kind of really implement best practices across all planting and establishment that we do as a city. Second, something that came up many, many times and was just alluded to in the previous presentation as well, is the need to improve communication to the public. So this is communication about our codes, tree care and education, or tree care education and activities that we provide, so our programs and the resources that we provide, a need to communicate those using accessible, culturally appropriate language, and also improving communication and collaboration with community groups. In terms of equity, a lot of opportunity there as well. It came up in, I think, nearly all work groups. Something that was repeatedly mentioned is the need for the city to take over street tree maintenance. Everyone has picked up on that as a critical need if we really want to reach our goals. Also an interest in coming up with ways to provide more support for people who want to preserve or plant and care for trees on private property, providing more and better multilingual communication, more bilingual staff, and focusing on hiring and workforce training to improve our equity outcomes. Thinking about climate change, there was a strong desire for the city and region and state to work together more and prepare, coming up with kind of regional guidance that we can all follow in terms of management practices, planting lists, thinking about wildfire risk mitigation, pest and pathogen response, equitable tree canopy distribution, and acquiring climate resilient tree stock. Also something that was expressed in a couple of different meetings was a need for longer establishment periods for all trees, recognizing that we are getting much hotter summers and don't have the rain in the times that we used to. So needing to accommodate that and provide more establishment support on public and private property. And then in terms of policies, a need to improve policies and practices to better preserve large trees, to protect critical infrastructure during extreme weather events, so storms, wildfire, more support for habitat restoration, and improvements for helping green and gray infrastructure to coexist. And generally, just to reiterate, I think among all work groups, there's a lot of a desire and interest in having more funding and staff support for preservation and maintenance of existing trees. As mentioned, more establishment for newly planted trees, and just sort of a real common understanding that we need those things if we want to achieve our city's canopy, climate, and equity goals. Now, I'll turn it. I want to kind of make space for the rest of the meeting to talk about our vision and goals. So we'll be creating, I think, as you know, new vision and goals for the forest plan. So I want to go over the process first for how we're doing this, and then leave the rest of the time for discussion. So in terms of the process, we're most closely working with the Community Advisory Committee to come up with the first draft. And of course, we're incorporating all of the input that we receive from you all today, and then the rest of the community from the open house, the survey, and our focus groups. And then from that, we'll have a working draft, and we'll refine those vision and goals. Again, with the CAC, the Technical Advisory Committee will also be working with different community organizations that work with trees. So groups involved with Connecting Canopies, Friends of Trees, our advocacy group, Shade Equity Coalition, a whole bunch of different organizations working in that space. And then our city staff, and coming back to all of you. We'll definitely come back in June and have a draft for you all to respond to, and you can share that in advance as well. And then once we have a very solid working draft of the vision and goals, we'll be then sharing it with the public during phases 2 and 3 of engagement, so we can make sure that we really reflect what we heard from everyone in our vision and goals, and can have some more room for refinement if needed. So next, I have some discussion questions, and you're welcome to respond to, I think, whichever of these as you like, but maybe let's start with the first one, and then 2 and 3 can kind of happen together. So first is, what would you like us to consider as we create the vision and goals? And I'll give an example, is that in the Community Advisory Committee, among some members, there's been an interest to have more specific goals, and make sure that they're kind of designed in a way that's a little bit easier for us to make sure that they're measurable and achievable. So that's one example. And then after that, I'm curious to hear from all of you about some topics, themes, priorities that you would like to see reflected in the vision. As a reminder, these are the current urban forest management plan goals. We have protect, preserve, restore, and expand Portland's urban forest, develop and maintain support for the urban forest, and manage the urban forest to maximize benefits to all residents. Initial thoughts, questions? Oh, Commissioner Vanderbilt?
Thank you, Belinda, so helpful. I have a couple questions, so I'll try to be succinct. One of them is, in looking at the canopy maps, I'm reminded, right, even for kind of, I'm going to call it the Northeast Portland District 2, right? Like the reason that that shows up as the lowest is the heavy industrial areas, which is harking me back to, I don't know how many years ago, related to our efforts to change that, and then running into the state's goal 9. So I just didn't know if that's coming up as part of the urban forestry management plan need. So that's my number 1. And then my number 2 is related to kind of how we define what an urban forest includes. And Belinda, you had mentioned, right, the interest around habitat restoration. And I'm just curious, like, to me, it's really important that we think about the urban forest as all of the canopies, right? Trees don't exist in silos, so to speak. I mean, sometimes they do, but like they shouldn't ideally. So I'm just, that to me is a huge priority, and how that's kind of manifesting in the conversation. And it relates to, of course, how we defined an urban forest. So those are kind of my 2 things: the heavy industrial, how are we moving forward that barrier around canopy, and then just how we're defining urban forest and natural resources within this scope.
Ryan, I think I'll let you respond to the first one.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take the industrial one first. Yeah, so for those who maybe haven't been on the commission for as long, the heavy industrial areas of Portland, which are largely in North Portland at the confluence of the Willamette and the Columbia and on Swan Island, and then along the Willamette in Northwest Portland, those heavy industrial zoned areas are exempt from tree preservation and planting requirements in a development situation. So they're not exempt from the code entirely, but when those lots are developed, there is no requirement to preserve trees, there's no mitigation to remove trees, and there's no requirement to plant trees. Some of the commission, both the Urban Forestry Commission and the Planning and Sustainability Commission in the past has brought up. So that issue is absolutely on the table as part of the Urban Forest Plan update. I will say there is a process happening right now led by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability that is looking at that amongst all the other issues around industrial lands that Megan just mentioned. We've been looking for the right time to bring an update to the commission about that work. It's there's quite a process in place that BPS is trying to follow to move through the very delicate issues that are at play there. So that is actually ongoing. And so I'm hoping to bring update to the commission on that soon. But yes, absolutely on the table with this plan as well.
And this is not exactly addressing your questions, Belinda, but going back to the slide where you showed the increasing canopy and it was the greatest and the most heavily forested places. When Vivek Shandas presented to us, I thought what he was showing us, and this was a while back, was that those were the areas that were gaining canopy because they had really mature trees that were growing. And that was a quicker addition to the canopy than a newly planted tree. So is there an explanation for that difference or?
Forget what, I don't want to, but I forget what he showed then, but I know the most recent paper that Vivek put out shows something very similar. It was a bit of this sort of bell curve of like the highest canopy areas lost and the lowest canopy areas lost, which is similar to that map, but then it was sort of the middle canopy areas that were growing. But I know like the way you can look at this data, there can be lots of different changes. So I'm sure Jeff is going to have precise information on that.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Jeff Ramsey. I Science and Policy Coordinator with Urban Forestry, and my team we track canopy cover for the city. So that's why I'm here, and sorry I walked in late. There were questions earlier. With this one, yes, Southwest, you see Southwest is big red on the map, it's losing. There are also big parts of the east side that are losing. So exactly what Brian was saying, that we're seeing loss, yes, where there are trees. There's significant loss where there is well canopied areas, but there's also loss in low canopy areas. So those really do stand out. Yeah.
Remembering that particular map, where we have high canopy in Northwest was not losing. The difference being, I suspect, the property ownership and use. There's Forest Park, and then there's so areas that might be developed or does that seem accurate to say it's loss in the high canopy areas that have residential or other uses, not open space?
You know, we did find that open spaces were losing a little bit, not nearly the magnitude that we were seeing in the residential areas. And when we looked closer, because we really wanted to check, and when Vivek did, you know, a year or 2 years ago, whenever he first came out, he was saying that places with canopy were gaining canopy. I think he's since, like Brian said, changed that tune. So we were like, oh, is that actually happening? And we looked really closely at it, and it was a lot of development happening in Southwest. You would see large patches of loss where there was development. So we tend to think of development happening in sort of inner Portland and maybe parts of East Portland. Southwest is also developing and densifying. That seems to be what was happening during that period.
I wonder if it's also, we're getting a more granular view now, because maybe before there was more of an average happening, where now we're seeing that, like you were showing, that like much more specific to each little hexagon. Yeah. So we're getting a better view of what's happening more locally.
I think we do have a canopy change by that hexagon level of detail too. It wasn't in this PowerPoint, but it'll be in the plan also, so we can also share that. Yeah.
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but what Commissioner Black just said is not represented in this PowerPoint. Like we are still, when we look at canopy change, we're still looking at it at the same level as we have in the past. Is that accurate? Or in this PowerPoint, have we gone to a more granular level of analysis?
I mean, we can't. I think in this PowerPoint you showed it by neighborhood or yeah. So and that's how we show it on our Canopy Explorer tool, which everyone should look up, Canopy Explorer Portland. But yes, we can. The ability to go to the granular level, it's possible.
We can and probably will. That's not what was done in this presentation.
Yeah.
But you can do it with the Tree Canopy Explorer, as Jeff said.
And I think getting to Commissioner Vandermark's other comment about how we're defining urban forest. We have been defining it as every tree in Portland, so including trees in natural areas. Been making that pretty clear throughout our conversations. I don't know if there's more to your question that does address, but I invite you to expand on that.
So Roberta Jordaner said it's actually defined as the trees and the shrubs. It's not just the trees that are the urban forest. That was in, I don't know what planning document she was referring to, but she said quite clearly it is not just the trees.
I'm not familiar with that. And we know that the city's code for the tree code that we implement primarily is limited to trees only.
I'll contact Roberta.
That'd be great. Thank you, Commissioners.
Yeah, and Belinda, just to follow up, I think mainly getting to a point moving forward, almost like with Jen's comment, right? That I think sometimes there's questions of what our purview is. And so the expansiveness of trees, right? I think it's helpful if the management plan that is guiding the work is speaking to that. It sounds like that's what you're leading with, but just re-emphasizing how important that is. Because if not, it's kind of like, well, it's not, that's, you all maybe don't comment on that. And it's like, well, actually, that's what I'm trying to get at. Ecosystem health.
Commissioner Clapp.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation on everything you guys are doing. I think to kind of focus on these questions a little bit, one thing I want to know is if the management plan will have any focus on changing code at all, or looking at places where the code does not meet even the current management plan, just in terms of potential loopholes or situations. I know, at least in my time, there was a very long list of code changes that would have been lovely, but just needed time to kind of develop. So is there anything in the management plan that you think would be kind of focused on that, saying here's what urban forestry can do within what we have, but here is the kind of policy and larger level code changes that we as urban forestry would like to push? Is that going to be included at all?
So we will be updating the Title 11 elements of code after this plan is developed. So certainly everything, all the engagement and analysis that we do as part of this process will inform those updates. Definitely during staff interviews, there were conversations about opportunities for improving code. A lot of those were more relevant to Title 33 than Title 11, but definitely we're capturing all of that feedback and we'll have some level of recommendations. They won't be specific code updates, but rather kind of topics and challenges that we'll want to see and carry forward in our next phase. Brian, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think that covers it. I think code, Title 11, Title 33, regulations are one tool for achieving the goals that are established by the plan. In the same way that Title 11 was actually an implementation measure of the 2004 Urban Forest Management Plan. So it's more about establishing the goals and then what are the ways that we achieve those. In some cases, it's going to be Title 11 changes. In some cases, it's going to be programmatic changes, things like that.
For those who might not be aware, Title 33 is the planning and
yes.
Zoning code. Yeah. It's primarily implemented by the Bureau of Development Services, soon to be the single permitting authority or a different name.
Great, thank you guys. I think I'll skip to number 3 at this moment to give you a bit of an idea of what how I would answer that question. And I think one thing that I would like to see is something that is integrated in a pretty intense level, from planting of trees to removing large trees, and focusing less on numbers, as everyone knows here. And if you don't, the idea of just planting a tree does not get us where we need to go. There's been a lot of criticism about planting millions and trillions and kabillions of trees all over the place and then not actually having anything further thought about that. Friends of Trees is doing a really good job of focusing on climate resilient species and changing the way that the canopy looks based on adding in diversity of trees and trees that have a lot of cultural value to people. And I think that the city can do more of that as well, in the sense of this management plan, or what my vision would be. I think would be the city would, as it's said again, and I think I'll try and say this every single time, take over management of our urban forestry, or I'm sorry, our city street trees management from start to finish, planting, maintaining, and ultimately choosing which trees should be planted where. We have great lists. They are optional. They are limited. And whenever you build a list of trees, that inevitably excludes other trees that didn't make it onto the list for one reason or another, not because they're not necessarily good trees, but there's 1,000 different reasons. And I think that we should use each one of those as a tool and look at every single possible spot in the city to plant a tree, and look at all of our tools that are available for us and choose which trees are the best. So if the city is able to do that as a management plan, you could consider what the right species is for the right place and the right objective. And I think that would be ultimately the last bit that needs to be included in this plan, so that each individual tree is not just a tree in an individual spot. It's a tree that's planted there because we are attempting to accomplish some very particular objective for that particular site, whether that's a new kind of species because there's only Douglas firs in this area, so we want to plant something else. So diversity on the block level, the neighborhood level, the full city level, things like that. But I think getting to a granular level of objectives and then using our infrastructure pieces to best accomplish those objectives, I think would be really great. So using the forest as a bit more of a detailed tool, rather than something that's just, yeah, we're planting trees and we're accomplishing goals. I hope that makes some amount of sense. But that's all I've got right now. So I'll give the floor up to somebody else.
I think piggybacking off what Casey said, I agree. Of course, I think we all do about the management of street trees. And the more I think about this, we really need denser housing. And in a lot of ways, denser housing in Portland is going to protect green spaces outside Portland, because we won't have the same pressure on sprawl, right? And so I think in that sense, that's a really key and important piece. And obviously we need housing for many more people. But with that, it's really hard, I think, for a lot of reasons, for the city to control exactly what happens on those lots and how that gets done. And we know that there's a vision that we would like to see, and we will be advocating for, of preserving green space while making denser housing happen at the same time. But it seems like the street tree is really that opportunity to keep those green areas that everyone can have access to, and at the same time really focusing on our other public spaces like parks. And so where can the city really make the biggest impact and create spaces that everyone gets to benefit from, I think is really key.
If this is gonna last for 10 or 20 years, perhaps the population of Portland will increase, see, but I really would hope this planning document that's gonna guide us forward somehow is very clear in promoting better use of the right-of-way space for trees. And by that, I mean parking spaces. Make that a strong priority as the only way you're gonna get sufficient space. I am not saying the whole city. I'm just have that as a tool, as an option. I know there's a pilot project and that's great, and it's coming along incredibly slowly, and we'll get the data from it incredibly long time from now. But that's the only way you're going to get space for large form trees is take out the bloody parking space, one space on a block, or some commitment to that. That may not be what the Bureau of Transportation wants. This is not a planning document for the Bureau of Transportation. This is supposed to represent urban forestry, our desires. Yes, it's good you're bringing in all the other bureaus for their feedback, but this is not their bloody planning document. This is to direct, what does urban forestry want? What is our vision? It may not be the same vision as the Bureau of Transportation, but it's looking forward. And so that is a space that is potentially available. And I'm not saying it's easy to get it, and I'm not saying we need it all, but we need some of it. So we need to call it out. And it should be in the planning document in some format. It can be put in very tactfully, but future actions of urban forestry will refer to the planning document. There needs to be something in the planning document that urban forestry can say, as is stated in our urban forest management plan. That's why we want to allocate staff to work on this or that. So I think it's a space we need to take more control of. Yes, Portland wants less cars. Okay, if you got less cars, I don't know if you will have less cars, but take some spaces for trees.
Yeah. Great point, great recommendation. I will say that to people from urban forestry and from the Bureau of Transportation who are working on that pilot are both heavily involved in this plan, me being one of them. So I think I definitely hear interest from PBOT all the time over their excitement for that pilot, which is called Trees in the Curb Zone. For those who don't know, when we'll be breaking ground for construction in July. So there's definitely interest from multiple bureaus, including Bureau of Environmental Services, and opportunities for seeing that program continue. So there's definitely a place for that.
And I want to add on that absolutely, I think that is an environment that is ripe for growing space for trees. But I do want to note, like, this is the plan for the whole city. It is not just urban forestry's vision, because we are, particularly the new form of government, we are moving to a one city approach. And so we do need to be in alignment with all of our bureau partners, because they all have an important role to play when it comes to actually achieving the goals of the bureau. So it's led by us. The city forester is the lead in terms of coordinating and ensuring that the goals are moving forward, but that requires cooperation and buy-in from our bureau partners as well. So it's why we have a technical advisory committee, because we want them involved and on board with this. And it doesn't mean we're always going to agree on everything, but the sort of direction that we're going does need to be the same.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that I think if we do want this plan to be implementable, we do need support from all of the other bureaus.
Okay.
Necessary.
I know that Adrian is actually calling in and she has her hand raised. So I'll make sure she gets an opportunity. Adrian, I've let you into the meeting from whatever remote area of the country you're calling in from.
Thanks. And sorry everyone that I didn't figure out that I could speak until late in the game. Yeah, so, that absolutely makes sense that it's a citywide plan. I guess the question, though, I would have is, when the rubber meets the road at the end, if there are key things that seem to be required to meet the overall goals, right? Then how will the planning process deal with that if they're not really desired, by other bureaus? So how do you manage to use all the tools available, right, to get to the overall goals?
Yeah, Adrian, you're cutting out a little bit, but I think the question was essentially, if there is not full agreement, how will those disagreements over potential approaches or goals be mediated between bureaus? I think the most desired way would be through the work on the technical advisory committee. I would hope that we can work through those disagreements and find common ground. There's a lot of interest and alignment in terms of where we want to see the urban forest go. Obviously, the action items to get there, that's often where, like you said, the rubber meets the road. I think more kind of philosophically, I think under the new form of government, the idea that we'll all be under a sort of city manager structure is intended to provide more of a forum and a decision-making process for working through disagreements between bureaus rather than the silos we have right now. But that also that this plan will most likely be adopted by city council, the city council that will be sitting in 2025. So that's another sort of venue for working through potential disagreements and balancing various city goals. So, but I think in general, there's a lot of opportunity and interest for alignment to be reached. But and I guess the last thing I'll say is the Urban Forestry Commission can play an incredibly important role in that as well as advisory to the city, not just to urban forestry or parks. So that could be something that we could look at as we get further into this.
I would also add. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think also a key focus of this plan compared to previous plans is the emphasis on implementation. So we are working with the TAC to vet recommendations, make sure we're on board, assign lead agencies, have timelines to make sure that when it's adopted, we're in a much better position to actually move forward with these actions. So that will help with some of that by having some of those conversations and discussions before we actually release the plan so that there's buy-in from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, that all sounds really good. I think, to preserve and grow the canopy, it's a little unclear, what are the major levers, right? And I'm sure the modeling exercises that you're going to do will come up with that. And, I don't know if it's going to be, well, we need to use a parking spot per block, right? Or maybe that in the end is a very small part of the equation. But yeah, there's likely to be some just important compromises to, in fact, accomplish that, right? So yeah, like what you're saying.
Commissioner Iheanacho?
Thank you. I had a few comments that I wanted to add. So regarding discussion question number 2, as far as the goals go, I wasn't sure because they're just listed as bullets, but I wasn't sure if we as the reader are supposed to glean some type of order of priority from them. If that is a factor at all, my suggestion or recommendation would be to list the second bullet starting with develop as first, followed by the bullet that starts with manage as second, and then follow up with the bullet that starts with protect as third. That's just what came to my mind. If the order doesn't really matter, feel free to disregard. My second comment on regarding discussion question number 2 kind of touches on a comment that Commissioner Clapp made earlier. So in the wording, it says develop and maintain support for the urban forest. My suggestion here would be to delete the word the, insert the word our to kind of show ownership and inclusion there. And then after urban forest, maybe adding the word infrastructure to kind of give us the sense that we are elevating this natural resource as a part of our infrastructure for the city. I don't know if that would be a political faux pas and have some other type of ramifications I can't think of, but if that is something that would be of value, I would suggest we consider adding that. So going down to discussion question number 3, the thought came up to me of making kind of the urban forestry subject matter expert more accessible to community members, maybe through, and this is just a suggestion, making some type of accessible telephonic consultative service so that folks who have a desire aren't just, faced with the list and told, okay, just pick, but maybe we could have a little bit of hand holding there where they could call a number and say, hey, here's my situation, here's where I'm located, I saw the list, but given what I'm seeing, and have a dialogue with someone who's knowledgeable. I don't know if we have the budget or the manpower for that, but again, this is just a suggestion that came to mind as we're working towards updating the management plan. Also regarding discussion question number 3, kind of to touch on something that Commissioner Nelson brought up, is maybe capturing the target areas that we would like to address. So maybe partnering with stakeholders in the heavy industrial areas, capturing that somewhere in the document, maybe in the appendix section, as an area that future people who are using this plan can consider, so that they, in 20 years, they can say, this is what the folks at that time were thinking. Maybe we can start here to make some gains. Yeah, I think I'll stop there, but those are some of my thoughts that came up for me.
Oh, thanks. I think to start, I just want to be clear. I appreciate your feedback on the goals that you mentioned, and I'll keep that in mind as we're working on this next round. But do just want to be clear that we are, the goals that I shared, which I also put in the chat, those are from the 2004 plan. So we will be updating those. But I will note your feedback and incorporate that in there. And at this time, we worked, at least it's my understanding, we worked towards all of these goals. So there isn't one over another. We're working on all of these things, all of those goals all the time. And then your comment about wanting to provide kind of better communication to the public to help navigate planting trees. We do actually have a tree hotline right now. So that's something, a resource that we do have available. And I think there's always opportunity to spread the word to make more people aware that we do have it. It's a great idea. It's something we're continuing to improve.
Yeah, and I'll add just the idea of providing more of that kind of like consultation education is great. I'll share just a really quick story of something that actually came up in one of our community workshops with some of our prioritized populations, communities, was someone told a story about removing a few trees in their backyard because the limbs were falling on their house, and then they regretted it. And they were like, wow, my house is hotter. I wish I had known more about some of the other options I had available, like pruning the trees and in order to preserve them. And so they actually were like, man, I wish I had a way of getting more information about other options I had other than just removing the tree, because they wish they hadn't. So that's something we could be more proactive in terms of that education providing. We might see different outcomes. That's great.
Commissioner Clapp?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what was just noted. That is, I think that Commissioner Iannaccio's idea of a kind of advice line is just fantastic. I know that that is one thing that I think is really frustrating from citizens when they call in and they say, "Hey, Urban Forestry, you're the single point of contact about all things trees." And inevitably, it's a we'll pass you off to this person. We can't do that. Here's some information, and it's a less of a we're here to answer your questions. Sometimes I don't want to completely do this. The tree techs are some of the smartest, most capable people, but they have a lot on their plate, and it would be very helpful, I think, if something like that was included with a management plan that had another goal of education and outreach that is far more uh, far more than what it is right now. I have my own ideas on that I'd love to bring up sometime, but having a more intense way for the community to make connections with the city, so it's less of a scary entity that does regulations and more of an education kind of outreach and almost like a extension service for the city and how we manage it and how you can manage your trees and here's how we can all work together. I think that would be a really good idea. So I just wanted to echo that.
Commissioner Meisner?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, kind of like to follow up on what's already been said. Such suggestion I have is something, and please correct me if this is already something that's already happening, but providing more education resources on how people can do their own tree maintenance. City code requires a lot of, or yeah, city code requires a lot of work to be done to ISA standards, but ISA standards aren't publicly available. If we compare that to the building code, the entire building code is publicly available. Someone could potentially build an entire house and have it pass inspection, but we don't have any resources for people to do the same things with their trees. Or for example, I know like PBOT really has like a 10-page like document on how a homeowner could repair their own sidewalks. But part of that sidewalk repair oftentimes involves pruning the sorry if I'm saying this wrong, but cutting the tree roots. But there's no guide on how to do that safely and properly for the health of the tree. So I would like to see something where there's more resources and education on how homeowners and anyone can do their own tree maintenance. And then on top of that, I was curious on, because I know it gets brought up a lot about how the city is moving towards maintaining the street trees. But I was curious what work is being done to, instead of just like focusing on the street trees, but working with like PBOT to look at the right of way as holistically as not just the trees, but the sidewalk and the curb, because the trees don't exist in a vacuum by themselves in the right of way. There's also the sidewalk, which often, like I said, comes in conflict with damages to the sidewalk. That's expensive. And I was just curious what's being done to look at this holistically.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I fully understand your question, so please jump in if I speak this. In terms of, I mean, we work with PBOT, and there's 3, maybe 4 representatives from PBOT in our technical advisory committee. So we are thinking about that as part of this plan. And another thing is that a previous plan led by PBOT called Streets PDX also tried to provide that kind of more holistic lens of this is our city's right of way, the street, including space behind the curb where there's the sidewalk and the planting strip, and all of the different needs that need to be accommodated within that space. So that sort of discussions and guidance has already started through that effort. And there's guidance within that plan that we will carry forward into this document as well, for how to balance those needs. I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question, so please feel free to jump in if I'm not.
Yeah, you're addressing it. I guess I didn't phrase it that great, but I guess specifically, like especially when we look at planting more trees in the right of way, which is great because it makes it nicer to bike or walk or any activities. But, and I know the city is going to start taking over the maintenance of the trees, but what about all the other costs that are associated with those? Like, for example, the city cleans up the leaves in the streets for certain neighborhoods, but not all neighborhoods.
Yep.
Or in, so I guess more so, I was curious about what's being done to address holistically everything that's happening in the right of way with trees and not just specifically
Not just the
with the
maintenance.
trees.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, so the leaf pickups, conflicts with sidewalks and costs. Gotcha. Yeah, some of that is not directly under urban forestry's purview, so it's an opportunity for conversations with PBOT to think about how we as an entire city can provide better care and support for property owners.
That's a great point. I think the same issue comes up with sidewalks where you see if it's the homeowner's responsibility and it's really expensive, we don't have accessible sidewalks all over the city. You know, that's right.
Yeah, sidewalks are in the same as street trees in that it's the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, which just like we talked about the inequitable outcomes and issues that arise from that for street trees, the same applies to sidewalks as well.
I'd add that those are great topics, Commissioner Meissner. And what Belinda said is correct, and what everyone else said is correct. I'll say that we can do more, and the forest plan is a good place to explore that in terms of sidewalk expense, especially when related to tree roots. I think most of you know, if not, I'll share it so that you can be familiar. When we did cost assessments and came up with the proposed implementation management structure for assuming responsibility for street tree maintenance, sidewalk repair was not included. And so that would be, if that's something that people are interested in seeing happen, it might be something good to bring up in this document in the context of this project. Also, your first statement about information for people about how to do tree care themselves, I very much appreciate that. Couldn't agree more. You had asked if there are any resources for that currently. There are some on the website, but they are not complete. They could be more robust. They could be more accessible. And in my experience, having folks be able to assist or show, demonstrate, train, those sorts of things, in addition to just providing written documentation, can be really helpful. We do have some videos as well. But those are great comments and areas to consider. Thank you. All right, well, it's 11.
Oh, realize.
Thank you all for the feedback. I'm taking good notes. These are all really great suggestions. So looking forward to bringing this into our vision and goals and carrying forward to the rest of the plan. And I'll be back in June with some draft vision and goals for you to respond to.
Thanks. We look forward to more time on the future agendas to dig into this some more.
Good.
Thank you for leading the meeting, Commissioner.
Thank you.
All right, with that, meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Good to see you all.